next speaker is Kohei Saito, who's a visiting scholar at the University of California.
No.
Okay, you will correct that. You'll correct your current affiliation, but we can add that he's the author of a book in German, published in German, but whose English title is Nature Against Capital, Marx's Ecology and His Unfinished Critique of Capitalism. So you can correct the rest and take over.
Thank you so much. Now I work in the econ department at the City University of Osaka in Japan, so I no longer live in the States. And yeah, my book also come out in English in this summer. The title is different, it's like Marx Eco-Socialism. But anyway, I talk about Marx dissemination in Marx capital dissemination in Japan. So it's very hard to go into the detail of this long history of the Japanese dissemination of Marx capital. So I have to focus on certain topics, and I don't have time to deal with the first translation of capital actually. And I'm more interested in today's relevance of Marx capital and so on. So I focus some issues, and then if you're more interested in the long history of Japanese Marxism, you can read this great handbook edited by Marcel Musto. My main point in this lecture is that basically the Marx capital did not disseminate in Japan. And in other words, it didn't have much impact on social and political movements. So basically, there's a strong division between the academic Marxism in Japan and the practical movements in Japan. So this is one of the reasons why the Japanese Marxism is declining so rapidly, even though we have an apparently rich tradition of Marxism. And considering this reason, I think it is very necessary to overcome this division between theory and praxis in order to build a more strong movement as the Japanese capitalism really dominates Japanese society and even destroys people's lives. So after a little bit of application, some people who actually are a little more familiar with Japanese Marxism, they might wonder why I say the Marx capital did not disseminate in Japan. Because Marxism was very dominant in actually the Japanese academia, and it is very unique in the sense that Japan is a capitalist country, but in academia, if you look at the econ department, for a long time, more than half of the econ department, the Marxist professors occupy more than half of the space. And this didn't happen in other capitalist countries like America or Britain. But also we had the first full translation of the Grundrisse, the first full translation in the world, published between 1958 and 65. And with regard to Das Kapital, we also have the sixth full translation prepared by different translators. And if you only talk about volume 1 of Capital, we have 11 translations, so that's quite a lot. And what is more notable is the fact that Marx published different editions of Capital while he was alive, as Kretke talked about it. But we usually read the fourth German edition, which was edited by Engels after Marx's death. But there are three editions that Marx himself published and edited, which is the first edition published in 1867, and the second edition, and also the French edition. And in Japanese, all translations are available in full. So before Kevin Anderson, who is here today, emphasized the importance of the French edition. I'm not denying the importance of Kevin's contribution, but I'm just saying, even before that, and even before the German scholars such as Helmut Reichert and Backhaus pointed to the importance of the value form theory in the first edition of Capital, in Japanese scholars, they eagerly discussed about these differences among the different editions of Capital. So in that sense, we have very rich tradition and deep analysis of Marx's Capital. However, we are, as said, witnessing the rapid decline of Marxism, basically because on academic level, there were always abstract and more like philological debates going on, while social and political movement did not really receive these discussions and did not read Capital. And in this context, one of the main exemplary figure is Itsuro Sakisaka. He is like very famous Japanese intellectual left. Not even before World War II, he was famous because of his supervising activity of Marx's complete works published through Kaizosha in the 20s, and supposedly the first finished complete works of Marx. But he was also very actively engaged in the debate between Rono-ha and Koza-ha, which is basically Koza-ha argues that there must be two-stage revolution because Japan was still semi-feudal society. So first there must be a more democratic and bourgeois revolution, and then followed by socialist revolution. But Rono-ha, represented by Sakisaka, argued that no, the major restoration was already some incomplete but still democratic revolution, so we can directly have a socialist revolution. So this was a very huge and main pre-war Marxist debate about the applicability of the Marx Capital to Asian countries and how to analyze the stage of Japanese society with Marx historical materialism and so on. But this debate got interrupted because basically socialism was illegal, so many people who were participating in debate got arrested, and so they couldn't continue debating anymore. And however, after the World War II, these people became very famous. They became almost a symbol of intellectual freedom and intellectual autonomy because they kept resisting the oppression by the Japanese government. So they went back to the universities and then started discussing new issues. Sakisaka was no exception. He went back to the university, but he was also became the leader of the group called Socialist Society, Shakaishuki Kyokai, within the Social Democratic Party of Japan. And this Japanese Social Democratic Party is very different from the European ones because they are very Marxist-Leninist. They want revolution, they want violent revolution and so on. But this is because Sakisaka's group, the Socialist Society, was the biggest fraction, and Sakisaka's interpretation was very dominant, and then so he was influencing his power even over the Social Democratic Party of Japan, which was actually the second biggest party in Japan next to the Liberal Democratic Party. So how did he become famous? He mainly became famous through translation of Capital, published through Iwanami Shoten. So this translation of Capital served to give Sakisaka authority as an intellectual leader among the left. Because Iwanami is the most famous liberal intellectual publisher in Japan, is very big, and they have this paperback series called Iwanami Bunko, which is compatible or comparable to the Reclam's Taschenbuch series. It's very cheap, and then they cover many classics from Plato, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, Leibniz, and then Sakisaka's Capital is one of them. So students or beginners just take this book, believing this authority of the Iwanami Bunko series, but there are some problems, and I'm explaining them. Basically, later, this guy, Jiro Okazaki, confessed that he actually prepared the entire translation, and Sakisaka did not do anything. And Sakisaka, according to Okazaki, Sakisaka suggested co-translating Das Kapital with him. But then when the book was published, Okazaki could not find his name, and then afterwards, Sakisaka acknowledged Okazaki's help or contribution in only 3 lines. And furthermore, Sakisaka took most of his royalties from the publisher. It sold more than 1 million copies, so he was, kind of rich. on the ground that he was more older and more famous. So, he's an asshole, but... Okazaki You can imagine that Okazaki was very sad and angry, so he later prepared his own translation again, so he did his work from the beginning entirely new, and his translation was published in the Japanese edition of Marx Engels Werken, the Marx Engels collected works in the Japanese edition. So this is a picture of his new translation, and I think this is the most consistent and the best translation. However, the most famous one is Sakisaka's translation because Iwanami Bungo is very famous. And then Sakisaka became very angry after that, and then he asked Iwanami to stop paying any royalty to Okazaki. And this story is like very interesting, but what's more interesting is that Okazaki confessed this story in 1983, and after publishing this book and celebrating the publication with some close friends, he left with his wife to the West. And we don't know what happened to him afterwards. We don't know. He apparently committed suicide, but he just disappeared. So this is like the last word, and he destroyed Sakisaka's fame. And also interesting is the fact that Sakisaka, he's like very famous, I've said, in the intellectual leader of the socialist group, but he did not really have any noteworthy, unique, original interpretation of Marx's Capital. I cannot really say anything about his theory. In that sense, we can sort of apply Michael Heinrich's characterization of traditional Marxism to what Sakisaka was doing. According to Michael, he says that the theory of capital in traditional Marxism played an identity-constituting role for participants of labor movements and left-wing parties, that is, as a tool to mobilize and organize them as Marxists or members of a certain group. So basically, this is what really Sakisaka was doing. He didn't really have any theory, but he used his authority to organize people, to join, to make them join the group. So basically, Sakisaka focused on his theory of exploitation as a proof for the illegitimacy of the bourgeois oppression in the capitalist society, and his theory of crisis as a proof for the inevitability of the collapse of capitalist mode of production. But he didn't have any theory like labor theory, value theory, fetish, and so on. So very one-sided and very simplified theory of capital. So in that sense, I want to argue that Sakisaka was very influential among the left, but Marx's Capital did not really disseminate in Japan, but only traditional Marxism did. And in that sense, we really need to overcome this division. On the one hand, like academia, Marxism only philological works, and then on the other hand, praxis is only about traditional Marxism. It's really now necessary, I think, in Japan to reread Capital more thoroughly to build a much more unified theory and praxis. Thank you so much.